Okay, so today's class, we are going to finish up topic 4, which was called wearing your genes. And we're going to look at the nature versus nurture concepts. And then we're also going to look at mutations a little bit as well. Okay, so keep in mind, not all characteristics are inherited. Some characteristics are going to depend on the environment. For example, the scars you have, the injuries, your hairstyle, if you've had surgery, those are characteristics that depend on the environment. Now, some characteristics are going to be due to a combination of factors, such as genetics, but also things like diet and your activity level. An example is weight. So, for example, this is the example on pregnant women. So, women who smoke during pregnancy, they tend to have smaller babies than women who do not smoke during pregnancy. So, and then later on, those smaller babies, they may have more health problems. So there is an interaction between a person's genetics that refers to nature and the environment, which refers to nurture. Keep in mind, genetics is nature. Sometimes people get that mixed up with the environment. They think the environment is nature, but when we're talking about nature versus nurture, the person's genetics is the nature and the environment is the nurture. So we have here an example here that's done with identical twins. Reason being is identical twins have the same DNA. So an example here, there were identical twins that were separated at birth and they were raised in different environments. So since identical twins, they have the same genetic information, they share many inherited traits. Now remember, some of these results and these studies are highly controversial and they are hard to explain. But in one example, a pair of identical male twins, they were separated when they were just 5 days old. And then they were reunited many years later. And it turned out that they were both volunteer firefighters. They had the same type of mustache and they were wearing the same type or style of sunglasses. So it's important here to keep in mind that it's the environment and our genetics that interact to produce many of our characteristics. So we're going to take a look at a couple videos on the nature versus nurture. This one is quite interesting, this rat licking investigation. So next we're talking about mutations and changing our genetic information. So genetic information, it can be changed by factors in the environment, but also by random errors. So when I talk about random errors here, I'm talking about random errors that can occur when DNA is replicating to make more cells. So there can be random errors like that. So if there is a mutation, that basically it's a change in the genetic information, a change in the DNA of an organism. And then therefore, because there's a change in the DNA, there's going to be a change in the structure of the organisms, right? Because DNA, it basically codes for proteins, and then those proteins will code for characteristics or traits. And then when we talk about mutagens, these are agents that can cause changes in the genetic information of an organism. So things like X-rays, UV rays, cosmic rays, and lots of chemicals. They can be mutagens, which can cause, for example, cancer. So usually mutations will have little or no effect. But there will be cases where mutations will have an effect. So for example, mutations can cause cancer. And these cancerous cells, they are able to divide very rapidly. So they're not developing the same way that healthy cells do. So these cancer cells, they're able to divide very fast and basically make more and more copies of themselves very fast. And therefore, they're going to interfere with the nearby cells and they're going to prevent the body from performing normally. If these mutations occur in the gametes, in the sperm, or in the egg cells, then these changes may be passed on to the offspring. And then it's these changes in genetic material that increase the variation within a species. Now, usually mutations, they result in unfavorable variations, but occasionally these new variations will either be harmless or they can even be beneficial. All right, so we'll talk about cancer a little bit more. What is cancer? So this is the term that is used for diseases in which abnormal cells, they start dividing without control, and then they're able to invade other tissues. These cancer cells, then they can also spread to other parts of the body through the blood or the lymph systems. Okay, so it's a group of diseases. There's more than 100 different types of cancer. There's some main categories. There's carcinoma. This is cancer that begins in the skin or in tissues that line or cover internal organs. There is sarcoma. This kind of cancer begins in bone, cartilage, fat, muscle, blood cells, blood vessels, or other types of tissue like connective or supportive tissue. Leukemia is the cancer that starts in blood-forming tissue, such as the bone marrow, and then large number of abnormal blood cells are produced, and then they can enter the blood. Lymphoma and myeloma are cancers that begin in the cells of the immune system, and then there's cancers in the central nervous system that can begin in the tissues of the brain and spinal cord. All right, so again, how do cancers form? So cells in part of the body, they begin to grow out of control. And it's these cells that have out of control growth that are the abnormal cancer cells. Normal body cells, they grow, they divide, and then they will die in an orderly fashion. And then these cancer cells are basically dividing uncontrollably and abnormally. And instead of dying, they're outliving the normal cells, and they are going to continue to form new abnormal cells. And they are usually developing because there was some sort of damage done to the DNA. And remember, DNA is what is controlling and directing all the cell's activities. All right, and usually the DNA has a process of being able to repair itself, but if it does not catch that mistake or mutation, then these cells will start to divide and divide and divide uncontrollably. And people can inherit damaged DNA. That accounts for inherited cancers, but other times a person's DNA might become damaged by exposure to something toxic in the environment, like, for example, smoking. Cancer will usually form a tumor, but there are some cancers that don't. For example, leukemia, that's a cancer that's involving blood and blood-forming organs. If cancer can travel, like if it gets into the blood, it can travel to other parts of the body. I did cross out book here. I don't know why it was book. It should be blood. So cancer cells can then, if it enters the blood, then those cells can now travel to other parts of the body. And then they can go to other tissues or other organs, and they can begin to grow and divide there, and they're going to replace that normal tissue. That process is called metastasis. When the cancer has traveled to another part of the body, that is called metastasis. But regardless of where a cancer may spread, it's always named from the place where it began. So for instance, if breast cancer spreads to the liver, it is still called breast cancer because that is where it began. Now, not all tumors are cancerous. There are something called benign or non-cancerous tumors that do not spread to other parts of the body. And usually these benign tumors are not life-threatening, but doctors, again, will have to keep track So you have to go for regular checkups and so on. Now, different types of cancer will also behave differently. Lung cancer and breast cancer are very different diseases. They're going to grow at different rates. They're going to respond to different treatments. So treatment will be aimed at whatever type of cancer it is. And reducing risks of getting cancer. It's a little bit tricky here because it depends a lot, like we talked about, nature versus nurture. So risk reduction is taking action to reduce or cut down your individual risk of developing cancer. So it can be your lifestyle choices, what kind of environment you're living in or working in. But even a person that has low risk, they may still get cancer, just as a person that's high risk may not. All right, so when we say low risk, it doesn't mean that a person won't get cancer. It means that the chances of getting cancer are small. High risk means that your chances may be higher, maybe genetically, but it does not mean that you will develop cancer. So there are some factors that appear to increase the risk of developing it. They're called risk factors, but there are risk factors that you cannot change. For example, you can't change your age. You can't change the family history of cancer, hereditary cancers, and so on. But there are some risk factors that are related to everyday choices, and those you can have control over. For example, smoking, eating a healthy diet, making sure you're eating lots of fruits and vegetables, limiting fat consumption, being active, staying at a healthy weight, not consuming alcohol, reducing your exposure to UV rays from the sun, taking care of yourself, like going to the dentist and doctor. So basically knowing your body, reporting any changes to your doctor or dentist. If you are using hazardous materials at home or work, make sure you're following the health and safety instructions. And also, lastly, there are certain immunizations from certain viral infections such as hepatitis B and HPV. All right, this is an example of the topic changing our genetic information. This is on sickle cells. So on the right here, we can see normal blood cells are round and like disc shaped. And then we have these abnormal shaped red blood cells. They're sickle shaped cells. I just put a sickle here so you guys know it's just a tool used in farming and agriculture. So these sickle cells are the deformed red blood cells, and it's caused by a mutation. And it is a recessive trait, and people that get this do become very ill because there aren't enough healthy red blood cells to carry oxygen throughout the body. But when this sickle cell trait is mixed with the dominant normal cell trait, the mutation is actually beneficial. People with this mutation are less likely to catch malaria. All right, so we'll watch a couple videos on this. There is this interesting one on that sickle cell disease. So like I said, it can be very, people that get the sickle cell, they can be very, very sick. But when that trait gets mixed with normal, the normal dominant normal red blood cell trait, then the mutation does become beneficial, and those people are less likely to catch malaria.